Carolina, holds a town hall meeting in New Hampshire. Three days after the San Bernardino shootings, the Muslim Public Affairs Council held its annual convention in Long Beach, California. This panel focused on coverage of Muslims in the media and how American Muslims can add their voices to national conversations. Panelists include the head of diversity at CBS and the woman who runs the LA Times website. The president of the Muslim group also discussed what the San Bernardino shootings mean for Muslims in America. This is an hour and 20 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Edina Lekovic, and I'm proud to have served with the Muslim Public Affairs Council for over a decade now. I feel like I've practically grown up here, and we are so proud to have you all with us here today to kick off our final Unconvention 15 session, where we've turned MPAC's annual convention on its head by taking it out to communities and coming here to culminate with this session before we have our annual banquet in a few hours. Thank you all for being here and joining us. Before we begin this session, I would like to introduce MPAC's co-founder and president, Salam al-Marayati, who will kick off the Unconvention and banquet for the day.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, Salam alaikum, peace be unto you. Thank you for joining us for this panel and hopefully staying with us for the banquet tonight. It's our 15th annual banquet, and it just seems like we started these events so shortly ago, and we are growing. And you're going to see tonight, hopefully, how MPAC has become a national voice on so many issues. Tonight, and today, this convention has the theme of celebrating our shared humanity. And what a timely topic, because it is our shared humanity that will help us overcome the ideology of hate, whether that hate is manifested in the form of international terrorism or in the form of xenophobia and hate crimes here domestically. We need to have a united front along both lines. And people have been asking us since the San Bernardino tragedy. First they ask, what is it in your religion that causes people to do things like what happened in San Bernardino? Our answer is, our religion is telling us to do exactly the opposite. Our religion is about mercy and compassion and justice. Our religion is about, if you save a life, it's as if you save all of humanity. If you kill the life, it's as if you've killed all of humanity. Apparently, they are not reading the same text that we are reading, or it is not being processed. We are a religion, they are a cult. We are actually the nemesis to terrorism. We are the antidote to terrorism. And so the more we can empower mainstream communities, the more we can overcome and prevail against that violent ideology. Number two, they ask us, why aren't you speaking out? And our answer is, if you go to the website of all the Muslim organizations, you will see documented the condemnations of terrorism over and over again. But it is obvious that we cannot make this problem disappear with press releases alone. What is required is civic engagement and partnership, so that those who are working with us as partners help us amplify the message. We demonstrate our work to the American public so they see us as the example and the standard bearer of our religion, and they see the cults and the fringe exactly as that. They are the fringe aberration, like every religious group has fringe aberrations. And more importantly, they see with our partnership with law enforcement that we are the answer to the problems of people's insecurities and fears in America. So our partnership with law enforcement means that we will work on the ideological, social aspect of the problem. They will work on the criminal aspect of the problem and the criminal investigation of the problem, and we work hand in hand in partnership. That partnership will help us overcome these challenges today. We're really proud that we have with us today Chief Mike Downing from LAPD. We just wrote a joint op-ed with him in the Washington Post about partnership, and I see other people from the LA Sheriff's Department, the Department of Homeland Security is here with us. They are here to say American Muslims, this is, to American society, this is the home for all people. Muslim, Christian, Jew, people, Hindu, Buddhist, people of all faiths. They are here to protect us, protect us against anyone that is trying to harm us. And the way to overcome the problems of xenophobia is to not be intimidated by them, to show strength in numbers. So I thank you for joining us to show that strength in numbers, that we're not going to be intimidated. The day that we can stand together, all Americans, and tell groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, you cannot terrorize us, will be the turning point in defeating that radical ideology. They want to influence audiences by terrorizing people. When we have the stamina and the perseverance and the strength and the resolve to say, you will not terrorize us, that will be a turning point. Finally, they ask us, well, aren't you frustrated all the time? You see these terrorist incidents and you got to worry about backlash, and you're just commenting on terrorism and backlash over and over again. The answer to that is yes and no. Yes, there is friction. Yes, there is a heavy weight on us. But at the same time, this is our plight. This is our moment. We are here to change the narrative of Islam in America. That Islam in America is part of the pluralism to contribute to civilization, where we can enrich society with our contributions, and that America will recognize the vital contributions of American Muslims. When we achieve that vision, then we feel that we have succeeded in our goals. So the terrorism that is emanating from the disintegration of the Middle East, from the problems overseas, we cannot control, but we can control the environment here. That is why this panel is important. How do we get our message out so we control our own narrative? And with that, I thank you. I hand it over back to Edina to lead us in this discussion. And again, congratulate. And Edina, she said it. She started here 10 years ago when she was 10 years old. We're so glad to have her. She's been on radio and television doing a wonderful job. So with that, please give her a great round of applause to lead us in the discussion.
Thank you, Salam. We are gathered here today as a culmination of a series of events that we've held all around Southern California for the past couple of months. When we took a step back as an MPAC team and thought about the 15th anniversary of our convention, this annual experience where we gather together to talk about the issues of the day, to take stock of where we've been for the entire year, and to think about the possibilities ahead, one of the things that came first and foremost into our minds was the changing nature of our communities and the changing nature of the ways that we convene as a community. 15 years ago, annual conventions and convention halls were the norm. It was the space where Muslims came together to meet, to exchange ideas, to go shopping in bazaars, and to meet old friends and new ones. Today, conventions are not the way to go. You don't have to go to a convention center to interact with the movers and shakers and thinkers in society who are shaping some of the very issues that are impacting our daily lives. You can go instead online. You can go a lot of places. What we decided to do was to turn our convention on its head so that rather than calling all of our community members to come here for a day of programming, that we would instead go out to communities so that we could bridge the gap and so that we could listen to communities and also bring to them the voices that they may not be hearing in their local areas, the voices of change who are leading the changes that we would all like to see in public policy, in public image making through media and Hollywood, and through new innovative projects both online and in person that are changing the nature not just of our community, but life beyond. So you may be seeing some pictures on the screen of some of the 5 unconvention sessions we've had around Southern California. The first one took place at the Islamic Center of San Gabriel Valley, where we had a fast-forward session where we featured up-and-coming voices, 5 up-and-coming voices from inside of our community who are leading change in innovative areas. The second session we had was at the Islamic Center of Southern California, where we looked at the issue of homelessness. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti declared a war on homelessness this year and has declared that we'll end homelessness here in Los Angeles. It's a regional priority, and it's one that hits close to home for Muslims because it's one of our core values to take care of people who need the extra help to get back on their feet. Our third session was held at the Islamic Center of Conejo Valley. What we did there was a Let's Be Honest forum, where we brought together diverse panelists, a counselor, an academic, an attorney, and a young leader to talk about the taboo issues that don't get discussed in our communities very often. And that was in front of an audience full of Muslim young people as well as Mormon young people, who had a great deal in common about the social issues and the religious challenges that they were also facing. And we had a fantastic conversation about everything from relationships and dating to our scriptures to how we make moral decisions and a host of other things. Then we moved to Orange County. We went to the Orange County Islamic Foundation, where we considered Muslims on screen and asked ourselves the question, is it getting any better? That's part of what we'll come to today. But we had there with us up-and-coming Muslims, some of them actually very well established, I should say, who work in the industry to give us a first-hand account of whether things are getting any better and where the opportunities for change are. And that was a really tremendous session. And then we wrapped it up last week at the Iman Cultural Center in West LA, where we talked about confronting Islamophobia, learning lessons through the lens of other faith communities who have been challenged by marginalization themselves, including the Mormon, Catholic, and Jewish communities. The lessons we gained there are more valuable than ever, particularly considering the events of this week. This session is called New Era, New Media, Opportunities for Change. And there couldn't be a more appropriate time for us to consider the meaning of this. When we came up with it, the new era we had in mind was not this one that we are looking at today. But certainly all of us as Americans are facing a new era in our country because of what took place in San Bernardino. And new media, the intersection of old media, new media, digital media, virtual media, and all kinds of other ones that I probably haven't heard of yet, are changing the very landscape of what it means to be an active citizen and an active participant in conversations. The face of the American Muslim community is changing. Social media has changed so much of how we operate as a community and the debates that we have, but so too are new media challenging old media, whether it's print newspapers or television networks. And so today I'm really pleased to be able to introduce you to a fantastic panel that we have who is going to share with us their personal insights from their long careers where they are at the leading edge of some of these very questions. You have their bios in the program, so I'm not going to read them in detail, but I want to introduce the panelists and jump right into our conversation. To my immediate right, we have Tiffany Smith-Anoa'i, who is Senior Vice President of Entertainment, Diversity, and Communications at CBS Television. Yes, please. She's been a long-standing partner with MPAC, and if you've heard about our Young Leaders Hollywood Summits, where we are encouraging and providing platforms for young people to pursue careers in this arena, CBS has been a regular stop, and it's been an amazing place that we will have good conversation about. To her right, we're really happy to have with us Megan Garvey, who is one of the deputy managing editors with the Los Angeles Times, and certainly it couldn't be a busier news day, and so we're really grateful that she peeled herself away to be here with us today. And then we have the only male on the panel, which is a nice change. Shahed Amanullah, who's no stranger to this community, grew up here in Southern California and has been a trailblazer in leading with new media since before social media existed. He was the founder of Alt-Muslim, of Zabiha.com, of these internet startups in the .com era that started to really put Islamic organizing online in a really unexpected way. Since then, he went on to serve with the State Department as a senior advisor And he helped create a program called Generation Change and lead a program called Generation Change that supported young social entrepreneurs around the world in Muslim countries to lead change within their societies. He's since come back and started something called Affinis Labs, which is a startup incubator, I think primarily or exclusively for Muslim social entrepreneurs, but we'll hear about that more today. So thank you, Shahed, for coming all the way from Washington, D.C. to be with us. Before I ask our panelists to start with opening comments, I want to mention two things. One is that we had hoped that we would have with us two executive producers from the Hulu series East Los High with us, but they had a scheduling conflict in the last minute and were not able to join us. So you'll notice their information in the program, but we're really pleased to have an intimate conversation here with the brief time that we have. I also want to mention that this session is being recorded by C-SPAN, and that it will air later this month on C-SPAN, hopefully. And so please keep an eye out for that. And finally, that we're being also, we're joined by viewers online through Periscope. And so we will be getting, hopefully, questions from our viewers online. And we also ask that you share questions throughout this discussion. I will certainly start off the conversation, but I hope to at least alternate between your questions and my own. So cards will be coming around, but this is 2015 and this is new media, so we're also going to ask you to tweet in questions. And so all you need to do is use the hashtag MPAC15 and submit your questions that way or on cards, whatever you prefer. We're old school and new school at the same time. And so please, please, this conversation is yours. I'm just here to kick it off. So with that, I turn to our panelists. With all that's going on, we're talking about this intersection between old media and new media. Megan and Tiffany, you both sit in old media, if you will, in the sense of working with a television news network and one of the largest print news publications in the United States, if not in the world. And Shahed, you have been a pioneer at looking at new media. What I want to start out with is a few minutes from each of you about your broad observations, or specific, if you so choose, about how the landscape has changed during your own career. What is changing? How is new media falling into this? And is it real change that we're seeing? Is it fundamentally changing what the work that you do, or is it more noise than substance, perhaps? And so let's start there. And Tiffany, I'm going to ask you to open it up.
Sure. And as opposed to old, I love the word seasoned. I think we're in seasoned media, I would say, right? Or traditional. I think that absolutely. I've been with CBS for 17 years now. So has it changed? Absolutely. Exponentially, I think that in the sense of social media, obviously, anyone and everyone, I look out into the crowd right now and I all see a lot of foreheads because everyone's on something, on a device. And it's almost an extension of our hands now. So definitely it has changed where everything also is so immediate and fast. Before, you would issue press releases. It would take a little while. We used typewriters a while ago. So seasoned typewriters. Now we're on computers. But everything I would say right now is much more immediate, and regardless if it is factually accurate. Sometimes that's something where it just doesn't matter if it's true. So many times in media, someone wants to be first. And I think that that's what has really changed more so than anything, that we have to just keep up with it. It's a beast that needs to be fed. It is no longer like, oh, we have to wait until the 6 o'clock news or the 11 o'clock news. It is immediate. And I think it's almost the first thing that everyone, when you wake up, it's the first thing you look at. It's the first thing that you check. You can't even watch a film any longer without seeing a screen. I want to tweet about it. I want to Facebook. I want to tell everyone. That's the other thing that I think that is really changed remarkably since I've started in the business that I'm in.
I mean, certainly the speed is something that I was talking to some of my colleagues and thinking, you used to have to call the library, right? Yes. And they would help you locate a person. And so you sit, I'm like, what did I do all day? I was like sitting there, I don't know what I was doing. So that's definitely a challenge. I also think it's exciting because there is an immediacy that never used to exist, and that goes both ways. So where I see a real change, you used to just, you'd publish the newspaper, and you would have, I mean, the way you would hear from or interact with readers would be at one time really just letters to the editor, or even when I was first starting out at the Washington Post a long time ago, they still had printed, they wrote down messages on a piece of paper, and you'd have to go up to the operator, right, to get that message. And now, where I think the new landscape can be exciting is that you can talk to people more directly, you can hear from them, you can also find out more about people. But yes, the speed is an issue, right? So you have to make sure that you're accurate. It's good to be first if you're accurate, but I think that, and certainly this week has shown that sorting through what's true, what's not true, what's rumor, what's responsible, sensitivity to the repercussions of making a mistake or overstating or understating information is a challenge, as is some of the interaction you get back from readers that might not be as pleasant, right? So, for example, every single story we wrote about the San Bernardino case, we had to make sure was pre-moderated because we knew immediately what kind of comments we're going to get. And so there's a difference between sort of a constructive conversation and questions about an issue and really hate speech. So I think trying to figure out where that, where it's valuable to sort of have that conversation, an honest conversation about people's questions and misunderstandings, and where that veers into something that just kind of pollutes what you're trying to report responsibly. So that's a pretty significant change.
I remember finding myself in Silicon Valley in the 90s, surrounded by this revolution. And I remember those people that were involved in this idea of this new medium being the one that replaces the old medium. They were driven by this saying, the medium is the message, and they used that to really as a battering ram against traditional media. They wanted to completely replace it. And I think those people didn't realize they didn't realize what they were writing on, because it wasn't just one revolution. It started with multimedia, then it went to the internet and blogs, then it went to social media, and revolution after revolution after revolution. And I think by the time we've come all this way, we're still trying to grapple with what that means. Because if you look at the system that we're in now, I mean, if you put all your faith in this, in social media, for example, there's multiple paradoxes at play. So, for example, it's much easier to put out sensationalist or violent or agitating themes than peaceful ones or moderate ones. It's just that the internet favors extreme speech. And that's something that we have, it's not a level playing field. So when, for example, when people talk about the extremist speech versus the moderate speech, well, they have a leg up, right? Second thing is that people's attention spans have been driven to tweet length, right? So how do you encapsulate big ideas into small bits of information? I mean, we used to call that poetry, actually, and it can be considered that as well. I mean, if we really do it right. But I mean, attention spans have gotten so small, and long form journalism, it's harder to do that. But what you're finding also is that what are people tweeting? What are people posting on Facebook? They're posting journalism, they're posting articles, they're posting the traditional stuff they used to bash, right? And over the course of 10, 15 years had devalued it to nothing, they don't want to pay for it, but it actually constitutes the content that drives billion-dollar valuations of companies. So this is the big paradox, it emerged to trash traditional journalism, but it's completely based now on it. And now you're starting to see even as the dust settles, as people try to figure out how to manage this new medium, you're finding, solid journalism coming back in things like, in even BuzzFeed, HuffPo, Intercept, things like that. People are actually starting to do much more traditional long-form journalism again. I feel like we've come full circle. But we're still in the middle of that revolution. And this still has not shaken out yet. If people think that, we've encountered all of the turbulence, people 10 years were saying that. I guarantee you that's not the case now. So I think what we need to do is go back to basics, right? And people are really starting to ask ourselves, okay, maybe the medium is not the message. Maybe the medium is the message. I mean, the message is the message. Maybe we have to start going back to storytelling. It's back to what is truly moving people, and this has now been democratized, where people can do this, people can tell stories in a tweet. Right? This has been the year of the Muslim hashtag. I mean, Muslims have embraced that medium to tell stories, to influence the media, and things like that. And so, we've just started down this journey. And collectively as a society, I don't know where it'll end up, but I'm hoping that it's going to end in a place where we do truly all understand each other and know each other better. Right now it's hard because there's hostility. It's a horrible place to be if you are a woman. It's a horrible place to be if you are somebody who people are not familiar with. It's very difficult if you're a Muslim. But I do think these things will pass as we mature, as we figure out how to balance this out, and as the majority of us realize the opportunity that we have to project on these spaces in the way that the first adopters, many of them whom were the extreme kind of people, did, right? So I'm hopeful.
So am I. One thing that I would like to say that a lot of times I think that when we talk about negative comments or that negativity wins, I feel that people feel that they're 10 feet tall behind a device, behind a computer, behind a phone, whatever that it is, that you can say whatever you want because you don't physically have to deal with the ramifications of talking to someone face to face. Another thing when we talk about that negativity sometimes wins, not all the time, because I'm an eternal optimist. One of the things when you ask someone, hey, how are you doing? And they say, you know, I'm doing great. Asks how great. They're just like, oh, that's great. What else is going on? It's one of those things where if you say, you know, oh, how are you doing? And, oh, well, my toe hurts and I'm sick. We can talk about that all over and over and over again, similar to what happens online where that discussion can feed itself. You can find that misery that loves company very easily.
Thank you. So one of the things that has certainly changed in this climate is the meaning of time. So the urgency of now, particularly in breaking news situations like the one that we're living through right now with San Bernardino, has certainly impacted decision making. And I want to start first with you, Megan, to think about how decision making has changed at the LA Times from the days there was, you know, just the daily newspaper, or maybe the afternoon edition, to now where there's a round-the-clock news cycle and a minute-by-minute news cycle, particularly where new information is being contributed online, right, through social media, through citizen journalists, if you will, and how that is impacting decision-making at the Los Angeles Times, perhaps even about what constitutes a good source these days, right, so that we prevent speculation where possible and make good decisions.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about what happened on Wednesday morning. So, interestingly enough, the first sign that something was really amiss in San Bernardino was a tweet that the San Bernardino Fire Department sent out saying they were responding to a shooting that had up to 20 victims. And, you know, the way it works in most newsrooms now, we have people who are sort of monitoring constantly for news on social media, which can be often the very first time you hear something. Now, you might hear something that's incorrect, but, you know, you follow up on it. I mean, the other night, Scott Weiland, the Stone Temple Pilots singer, was found dead. The first indication of that was a tweet from Dave Navarro, you know, another rocker. So you hear it and then you have to investigate it. So at first I saw it almost immediately and I thought, could that number be right? But I was in my office, I got up and I walked into the floor, right? And we started sending people out. We had confirmed with the fire department that that was the information that they had, and then started listening to the police scanner. Now, a police scanner isn't always correct. You know, law enforcement authorities talk to each other over it with, you know, speculation sometimes, or the best information they have available. So again, it's just like social media, kind of more of a tip sheet than it is something you would report directly off of. And we sent, I think, probably 3 reporters immediately, then another 5 within 15 minutes of that, heading out to San Bernardino from downtown Los Angeles. And so while they're heading there, we're trying to work our law enforcement sources and social media and other news reports to try to figure out what we thought we knew, right? And I think that what happens is, this is actually a really good example, that the LA Times, like many, I'll call them legacy news organizations, yeah, isn't it good? Sounds nice. So. You know, really are trying to figure out how do you operate in this era. And I would say, I'll just ask the room, how many of you, I hope some of you still get a print newspaper because that pays my salary basically, but how many of you are waiting for your newspaper in the morning to find out what happened in the world? I mean, a couple? Okay. I'm amazed, but good for you. Good for me, actually. But what I would say is that, you know, most people aren't waiting for, even if they get a print newspaper, for the news. And I think, like, particularly in a huge breaking news event like this, and at first the broader implications weren't clear, right? I mean, look, in this country, we go through these mass shootings at a stunning regularity right now. I mean, it's, it's, you know, I mean, I remember this was something that was pretty unusual at one point in my career, and now does not feel unusual at all. I mean, we fired up a live blog for Paris. We had, you know, reporting from Colorado Springs. I mean, it's sadly routine. But that said, I think especially in a major news situation, I think as a respected, I hope, news source, we bear a responsibility for separating the fact from fiction or speculation. So I think that you feel that responsibility that, you know, I'll take on Scott Weiland, we were the first news organization who actually confirmed it. We spoke to his wife. You know, other people had said it was true without having a source. And we were very careful on San Bernardino to try to make sure that everything we were reporting we knew to be true. And we waited on some things. I was saying, we were talking before this, and I said, we didn't even connect the chase and the firefight with police officers immediately. I mean, it seemed pretty clear it was probably related, right, to what had happened at Inland Regional Center. But, you know, we did not connect them until it was connected. And I think I was at a conference a couple years ago with a very fancy title. It was called The Future of Storytelling. And one of the men at the conference, who actually works in the music business, was talking about how when music became available online, and you know, people could post to YouTube and various other sources, a lot of people thought, oh, well, you know, it's been democratized, and you know, sort of the tastemakers won't matter as much because people will just on their own decide what they like. And he said that actually an interesting thing happened. DJs became suddenly much more important than they had been in years, because it's difficult to sort through everything out there. And so you're still looking for someone to help you curate and understand the news, just like I think you're looking for someone to help guide you to the kind of music that you might like.
This is exactly why, as someone who has been promoting citizen journalism for my whole career, the idea of a world where all we have is citizen journalism scares me. I think there needs to be a role for professionals to at least be a part of the conversation, right? I'm not saying that they should dominate or control, but to be a part of the conversation where citizen journalism has a conversation with them. And I think that's the ideal.
Absolutely. Okay. So Tiffany, I want to turn to you because a situation like San Bernardino, you know, the line between news media and Hollywood media, some would argue is getting more blurred with infotainment, right, and the different kinds of things that are going on. I'm curious about how the events in San Bernardino or similar ones, whether it's Paris or others, impact decision making at the network around sensitive storylines or other things that are going on.
Absolutely. I think that people look to television to define social norms. One of those that, oh, I saw it on television, so it must be true. And obviously, yes, it's for entertainment. However, sometimes a lot of dramas that will feature storylines that might be pertained as insensitive. And so we looked at those before, look at our storylines, look at the content. Are there too many guns being used? Are there too many of such and such? And so we look at those and make sure that we are being sensitive to the climate as well as our audience. And we definitely do that. And we have done that, I think, on Supergirl, even a superhero show, something on those, where we made sure that we switched that particular episode. So we definitely, that is always top of mind.
Okay, thank you. So with the race for eyeballs, whether it's to, you know, any screen you're looking at, everybody is walking, you know, across the street with their eyes glued to their screens. It's the new way to just be. How does that impact decision making for you, Tiffany, in the network? We had hoped to have the Hulu executive producers here because they're behind the first all-Latino cast show on television, broadly speaking now, including Hulu. And I'm curious about how new media and the changes that you're seeing in spaces like Netflix and Hulu are impacting the kinds of decisions and the future of a place like CBS television.
For CBS, it really is that we feel television rules, obviously. I mean, being the #1, the most watched network, absolutely it feels that television is still very much significant. And I feel that we are utilizing all of the platforms, whether you watch that traditionally in your living room, kitchen, bedroom, wherever that might be, or on your television, it still is the same in that sense. But it's also that it's broadened so much. I mean, 16, 15 years ago, yes, there were only 3 networks. And now look at it, you can't go through, I don't even think you can spend an hour going through all of these cable stations and wondering, how does this content? But I think that anyone also right now that has a phone can be a content creator. Everyone has that voice, and I think that that's important also when we're talking about images, representation, all of that really truly matters, and so you want to make sure that that's how it goes as well.
So let me ask you a follow-up question. You focus on diversity and getting, you know, the shows that we watch on television to reflect the faces that we see when we're out on the street.
Try hard, try hard.
Uphill battle.
I'm fighting the good fight, guys.
And we know it at MPAC for sure. But I'm curious about how, whether a show like East Los or Aziz Ansari's new show, Master of None, or so many others that are out there being in starring roles with people of color, whether that is helping your job at the network to diversify the shows on screen.
Absolutely, of course. Anytime, you know, you can't say the word empire without every network wants empire on their schedule. So of course, I mean, I think that any of those shows, but again, a lot of times when I say people have to create their own where it is, sometimes that they do within a less traditional space, but also that's why it's important for myself and the people that are in these roles, making sure that we give a voice to the voiceless, making sure that we ask those questions when we look at a casting list. Does this really look like our America? Does this really reflect what someone would particularly say? Is this accurate? And I know we're not the History Channel. I know it doesn't have to be factually, but we have to make sure that are we actually casting the widest net? What are these images showing? And I think that a lot of time there's a tremendous amount of unconscious bias as well as conscious bias, let me tell you. But unconscious just in the sense of we've seen it this way, this is what looks normal to us. And I think that I had a great example of this. There was a role for a firefighter. And when they came in, here's the fire, there's 30 men, number one, and I'd say 29 of them were white men. And I said, you know what about if we did an Asian American female? And the casting directors, they were kind of like, what the hell is she talking, you know, what? Just in the zeitgeist, right? We're not thinking that way. And I said, wow, you know, the captain of the fire department in San Francisco was an Asian American female. If we saw more of those images, it becomes normal. If we saw more Muslims in particular roles where it wasn't so stereotypical, it becomes normal. That's why Master of None, yes. Does it help me? It helps me tremendously. I'm sending emails, look at this, look at the great press that the LA Times is showing about this show, or whatever that it is. So it definitely helps the more that we can see that this is the new normal.
Yeah. Thank you. Megan, I want to turn back to you because this question of how do we get eyeballs came to me yesterday when we watched CNN and MSNBC go into the apartment of the suspects in San Bernardino. And there are all kinds of ethical questions involved there, but I noticed that this morning on the front page of the LA Times that photos from the inside of the apartment were splashed across the cover. How does that kind of decision-making happen, and to what degree is it influenced by eyeballs versus news value? And to what degree do you feel that there's a media responsibility towards allowing the investigation to take place, or how do you grapple with that?
Sure, I'll clarify a couple things. And this is something that we took some time yesterday. We did have reporters who were in the apartment. We did not immediately use that material because we wanted to assess sort of what had happened. So the investigation, that scene had actually been cleared by law enforcement, so they were not going into an active scene. It was boarded up because the windows had been shattered, I think, in the course of the search of the home. So, and the landlord later came out and said, you know, this had been a cleared scene. It is in their purview as the property owner to allow people into the property. And so ultimately we decided to show images from inside the apartment because I think there was a news value to trying to understand, you know, was there a normalcy in these people's lives? What was it like? And what we didn't do, which I think, you know, the networks that did it have already apologized for, is go in there with a live feed and do things like hold up, you know, the mother's driver's license, which had, you know, a lot of information about her on it, and photos of other people who may have had no connection to anything other than, you know, their photo was in the house. And I think that, you know, and I feel like it's a problem that in live news situations, TV has had to grapple with for years, right? Which is, you know, you're in that moment and, you know, you're not taking time to sort of assess the value of it. I mean, you could hear some of the anchors sort of say, well, hold on, don't get in that close. Like, hold on a minute, And I do think it was sort of a moment to, and I think that probably a lot of journalism organizations are considering, like, how is this a teaching moment to think about, just because you can do it, should you, and what is the news value of something. So, and I do feel that, I feel like it's funny because we're not in exactly the same situation as like being live on air and talking, because our vehicle for being live is actually written and visual in a way that's archived. I think if you went back and watched like most live news broadcasts in huge news situations, all kinds of errors get made, all kinds of things are said that in that moment seemed true, and that there were 3 shooters. No, there weren't. I mean, there were lots of speculation. But when you're writing on the internet, it's still there. It doesn't go away unless you're, disreputable and you erase stuff that you've made mistakes on. So I think, almost the act of having to write it down makes our organization maybe a little bit more cautious, because you realize it's going to stay out there. So.
Thank you for that. Shahed, I want to connect you to this question in the sense that when we see media or politicians or others who make decisions that we agree with or disagree with, in this case, yesterday in response to this, I can't remember what the hashtag campaign was that started, but it was something like My Muslim Apartment or something along those lines, that was basically a send-up, right, or a caricaturization of what was taking place. How is social media a platform and to hold media, all kinds of media, or even public officials accountable? And I know that you've been a force behind some social some hashtag campaigns for good. Can you add to this?
Well, no, this is one of the examples of true empowerment. I mean, we've been trying to figure out how do we use these tools to empower average people to move the needle on media, and the hashtag campaign has become one of those ways. I mean, everything from Black Lives Matter, on, and this year, a lot of Muslims on social media who had been making points on social media, but they hadn't been moving the needle very much, realized that there was a lot of traction in hashtag campaigns. And why is that? It's because they elevate the discourse to a much more cultural level. It wasn't just about pointing out, inconsistencies or the facts or things like that. It was about telling a story in a hashtag, right? So when you do hashtag My Muslim Apartment, what you're doing is you're telling the story of ordinary lives, your neighbors. We have cats and dogs like you do. We've got sporting equipment, and it was a very humanizing thing, and it was driven by that need to seem human in a social media sphere where everybody was focusing on the suspects and nobody was focusing on the outer circles, the brother that is a Navy veteran, the people in the community who had grown up in that community, who had worked in that same center, all these different things. And so that's, it was a very intelligent way to go about that. And, we did this with the hashtag Muslim ID with Trump. And so we were all putting out, here's, I served in the armed forces. I put up one with my diplomatic passport. I represented this country overseas. Here's my Muslim ID. We're trying to model by example. Here are creative ways to respond that aren't, grievance-driven. They're not depressing. They're actually uplifting, inspirational. The more that we can respond in that way, it's not just about engaging with the media, it's about engaging with the public. That's, the thing about social media is you can't segment your audience the way that a lot of other traditional media can. Every audience is looking at you at exactly the same time, and so you've got to tailor it in a way that everybody gets the intended message and nobody gets misdirected.
Thank you. I want to start with our first audience question, and again, I want to go back and forth, so please submit your questions. If you're tweeting, they'll be, we'll incorporate them into the conversation, and for our viewers online, please do the same, MPAC 15. So the first question we have is, I think, Shahed, if you can start with this. It seems the world we live in favors immediacy and shock value. What can be done to change the way we communicate the messages of peace and respect? Press releases are great, but flash mobs might reach a greater audience, just as an example.
This is the great dilemma of the time that we're in. I mean, to be able to react quickly and to get something out there, it's not a skill everybody has. I mean, people have to learn how to be nuanced quickly And people always ask me, how do you get good on Twitter? It's like, well, you just practice. You practice tweeting and you practice figuring out what gains traction with people. How do you condense a big idea into a few words in a way that people want to retweet it, right? It just takes practice. And so I do encourage everyone. That's why I encourage people to get on Twitter. It's just not just because you want to get followers and things like that, but because it's a great way to condense your thoughts. If you can, even like when you're on a stage, even if you can speak in tweets, people will then take it and send it out, and it's more than 100 people. It's thousands of people. So it's just people should just embrace this as a training mechanism. This is how you convey ideas. This is how you tell your stories. This is how and then that multiplies faster than you would ever imagine.
Thank you. The next question from the audience, I think, is for all of you. Any of you can jump in as you like. As decision makers who drive, curate, and disseminate content for mass consumption, what would you recommend to the American Muslim community by way of getting involved in shaping the message and balancing the inevitable bias that exists in today's world?
For me at CBS, one of the most things, and I think that when we work together mostly, is with our youth internships. I can't tell you how many times, because once we hire someone, 9 times out of 10, it's someone that we've been more familiar with. And so I would say for anyone that is within, their college career, apply for internships. Those are, that accessibility, being able to become more familiar with, like, I have my current intern right now is Sikh, and from the Sikh community. And I think that it has been so wonderful, not only for himself, he wants to be a director ultimately, but for also all of the employees on my hallway that see him every day, and they are exposed to someone different. So I would really say that how do we change that narrative, or how can we become more a part of the conversation or a seat at that table? For me personally, it would be internships, getting into the system, getting into the door, and making sure that your voice is heard, because that's the one thing that we all can utilize, whether it is on Twitter, whether it is in print journalism, but it is making sure that you do have a voice and have people really get to know you and not assume that they know you just because of what we can see out here.
I mean, I would say along the same lines, I think being active in fields and careers that have the influence, right, to shape the storylines is important. And I think it's not about, I don't think Muslims should, go into journalism to cover the Muslim community. I think they should go in and cover a range of things. But I think the fact that, like in our newsroom, there's a number of people who are Muslim and practicing, and that influences sort of, your daily experience, and also is a resource when something happens to talk to them. So like one of our photographers, Irfan Khan, actually lives out in the San Bernardino area and has been in that community for years. And so when, this happened, he's already out there. And also someone you could just talk to and say, hey, Irfan, how is the community feeling about this? Like, what can you tell us about this family? What can you tell us about being a Muslim in this area? And that's all really important, I think, to sort of contextualize and understand what happened beyond just like dropping in from, the city of LA and trying to sort it out.
I do want people to take a step back and think about the way things were with respect to the Muslim community in the days after 9/11 compared to today. Back then, I would hear people talking about us as if we were, in a very anthropological way, like we were like animals in a zoo or something, that no one could interact with us. Now today, when I turn on TV, I see familiar faces. I see talented people who are, I see, there are people in this room I've seen on TV where Muslims are part of the conversation. I see, I get contacted by reporters who are Muslim themselves. I see op-eds being written by people who started out as bloggers and became pundits. And if you add onto that the Muslims who are increasingly active in Hollywood, the Muslims who are increasingly active in the industry of creative industries, we've come a long, long way, and it has moved the needle in tremendous ways. And even when you look at the new media space, look at the rising YouTube stars, look at people who are out there who are part of those conversations. We're there, and we have the mechanism to keep that moving. We've just started.
Thank you. I want to shift back to television a bit because we had a huge advance this year at the Emmys when Regina King won an Emmy for portraying a Muslim character who was herself a hijab-wearing or a headscarf-wearing character in a positive role. And that, I think, was a huge shock. I think for many of us within our communities to see that kind of role first exist out there. And then this fall, there's also shows like Quantico that feature Muslim characters in more and more roles. What do you think is, where are the possibilities for better portrayals on television and in film of Muslim characters? Because this is one of the places, one of the most common grievances, if you will, or criticisms of Hollywood is the ways that we're reduced to such a caricature.
The possibilities, I definitely think that they're endless right now because there are so many more people that are writing. And that's before an actor can ever act, someone has to write it. And so that's why when I was talking about internships, when I talk about informational interviews, it's so important to make sure that that voice where those creators are created, that can be seen as four-dimensional people, as human beings that have lives, that own cats and dogs, that have, that eat pizza. I think that the more that we're able to see that, so the possibilities absolutely are endless. One of the things that we did this year that I'm extremely proud of is that we had an event with all of our casting directors. And we kind of had a real talk about when does diversity come into play, and you can't let whatever makes someone diverse supersede their character. Do you understand? In the sense of, here's a person, I need someone who's going to be the doctor or the victim or whatever that it might be. Don't let, you know what, I think that I need someone to fill in just for racial purposes. And one of the things that I say so often that I will say this until the day I die, diversity does not mean black. That's one thing that we'll be in a room a lot and it'll just say, okay, well, we cast the black guy or the black girl. I think we're done. I think we're done for the week. We're good. It's all, we did it. Our job is done. Diversity in its truest sense means more than one. So let's make sure that we are really, really looking for what does this look like? How can this role be? We are doctors, lawyers, teachers, firefighters. There's so much more. And I said, again, we gave this book called The Hidden Brain, which is my Bible. And I think I've put this gentleman's children through school. I purchased so many of his books that we gave it to every casting director. Because casting directors, there's no casting director school. It's not like a doctor. You go to medical school and then hopefully you'll know how to operate on me. But if a casting director, you're taking your environment. You are taking where you were raised. You are taking all of those things, and they definitely play a role in how you see television characters. And so I think that one of the things that I've been so proud of is after they read the book, it was like, oh, okay, I see that anyone can play this role. And I think that the possibilities absolutely are endless. So Regina King winning that Emmy, we all celebrated that day because we want to see more of that. And I'm not saying that we always have to be good. I know we all know, right? But when do we reach parity? Because we've been this a long damn time.
In terms of diversity, for people who think it's not just diversity for diversity's sake. Yes. It's what the public wants. And if anyone doesn't believe that, take the top 30 YouTube stars in terms of subscribers and number of views and line them all up and look at how diverse they are.
Of course.
Compared to what you would generally expect.
And believe me, I don't want diversity for diversity's sake either, because it'll say, does the most qualified get the role?
That's what people want.
Of course, but look at the numbers. Diversity does not, like I've said before, it's a smart business imperative. And people are leaving so much money on the table, it's ridiculous. So that's one of the things. It's not just, let's just throw in someone of color and we're done. Check the box and we're good. It's not that. Of course, as someone in my role, do I want the best actor to get the role? Because we'll always hear that one. Well, we did see diverse clients, but we had to go with the person with the best actor. Well, are we making sure that we're really wide enough? Did you really look hard? Look harder, do better, and be smarter.
Thank you. So let me ask you a follow-up question related to Hollywood or to television. This is the intersection. Hashtag campaigns like the takedown campaigns of Alice in Arabia, of Tyrant, of, you name the Hollywood project with the stereotypes in it. And full disclaimer, MPAC is a consultant on Tyrant to help humanize and diversify the kinds of roles that are out there. There are some who say, that we should try to get these shows just off the air before they can even start. There are others who say we should engage to make them better. From your perspective as an executive on the television side, when communities raise issues, particularly on social media and other platforms, with their concerns about whether it's shows that are still in formation or shows that are on the air, what's effective, what's not, what do you hear, what do you, how does that work, and how can we be effective consumers?
Being able to properly and effectively communicate. And that's the first thing. Whenever there has been a particular storyline that I'm not very comfortable with this, I'm going to make sure that I reach out to MPAC, or I'm going to reach out to the NAACP, or I'm going to reach out to that particular community that I might feel that there might be some sensitivities, and have a conversation. Then you go back to your writers, directors, producers, and really express what is being told on social media. Why is there a concern? What is the issue? And 9 times out of 10, when you actually talk to someone and effectively communicate, you can get the message clear. Where it's just like, are we just doing this for sensationalism? Are we doing this to perpetuate a stereotype that we've seen over and over and over again? And the audience doesn't want that. And that's the other thing. They'll smell authenticity very quickly.
Shahed, do you want to weigh in on this in terms of how social media campaigns, can impact portrayals, or how community members can leverage or utilize those outlets to make their voices heard in an effective way?
Well, there are effective ones and there are ineffective ones, and I think when you're trying to create a conversation where you're collectively trying to make something better, I think you can achieve something. But often there are campaigns that are just confrontational, that just want complete victory in the way they see it, and to want to shut down something completely. If people are trying to do a show and it has some kind of intersection with an identity that you relate with, if you shut it down, you reduce the chances of something like that ever being done again, because they'll say it's not worth my time. But if you work with them, even if it's not perfect, and it looks like it works and it gets out there, then you've increased that appetite. Then people have to look at the long term, right? So not all social media campaigns. I tend to favor the ones that are conversational, aspirational, funny, touch people's hearts. Those are the kind of campaigns I like to see go forward. I generally think that the ones that are, I like to save the really harsh ones for really strong circumstances where you just simply do want to get someone to shut up. But that's, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, our next audience question is, how do we ensure accurate and honest reporting and journalism in the new era of news and media? How can the audience rely on what they see and hear?
I mean, I think as consumers of news, you have to judge, your sources in part. And I think that sometimes what happens is, and this is maybe more than used to happen, you sort of self-identify with a community that, you agree with. I mean, I think you even see this on Facebook. I mean, I have some people on Facebook where they don't really think a lot like I do, and then I have that constant sort of decision to make about whether I still see their feeds or not, because sometimes you start to get really upset that someone has a different opinion from you, and then part of me feels like, well, this is like a window into a part of this country that maybe I'm not always exposed to, and so maybe it's good for me to hear that. But so I think I would say you have to be a smart news consumer and decide whether you think that the source is objective. And I think that that's where, Shahed was talking about earlier, that there are a lot of citizen journalists, but they don't, journalism is a professional career. I mean, I've spent a long time learning how to report, how to find sources, how to decide whether someone is being truthful or is someone who should be listened to, whether something seems suspicious to me. you know, how to find documents that support the story that I'm hearing. You know, if somebody says to me that something is true, I don't take their word for it. I check it with someone else. And so that's where I think there is a real value in the legacy news organizations where you've had that kind of training. And I think, you know, use your common sense. I mean, because you want to believe something because it fits into your worldview doesn't make it true. So consider the source. You know, be careful about what you share, because you may be sharing that information because it appeals to you. I mean, that happens on all ends of the political spectrum. So it's hard. It's hard because, you know, there used to be a few sources and now there are many. So I think we have to be educated consumers of information.
The same people that would look at you and say, I don't trust that journalist, but I heard a rumor, and they'll put it out there. And they don't see the inconsistency of that. This is, I think, where we have to have a collective conversation about how to properly manage the responsibility that we all have, that we can interact with the world now. And that has consequences if you say something that is destabilizing.
And sometimes there's a tendency, because you don't like the information, to believe it's untrue. And not liking the information or making you unhappy or uncomfortable is not the same as the information being false. And I think that sometimes we all probably make that mistake.
Thank you. So to piggyback off a point you just made, one of these audience questions says, one of the problems with social media is that people tend to connect mainly with other like-minded individuals or groups. With that in mind, is there still hope for building bridges and expanding exposure to different ideas online? And how do we best do that, I guess?
I think there is, and I think, you know, I think some of these like Black Lives Matter or other campaigns, I'm even thinking more recently about the backlash to SNL, you know, for having Trump on, and people just pointing out, I mean, he said a lot of different things that probably offend a lot of different communities, but in particular, just the fact that SNL, that's been around now, how long, 30-some years, 40 years? So, you know, has managed to have, what, like 2 or 3 Latino cast members ever? I mean, you know, no one else is funny, I guess, I don't know. But, you know, I think that sort of fact-based, just sort of that consciousness raising of saying, like, hey, you know, you're going to have Donald Trump on, he said all this stuff, you know, a lot of it's demonstrably not true, and yet, you know, this is an organization that this is a show that's been on for 4 decades that's barely managed to diversify beyond black and white people. So to me, like, that's a way to sort of cut across. So even if you love Donald Trump, I think that fact-based question about why SNL has failed to find anyone other than, you know, white or African-American people to be on their show is something that, you know, I think you would just pause and think, well, that's actually a pretty good question. You know, this is a country where Latinos make up a significant part of the population and are incredibly influential. So how is that?
No, we're never going to get very far if we segment ourselves so much that we don't understand other people. I mean, we are as Muslims trying to tell people that they need to let us into their circles, but we, you know, we'll segment ourselves out and build this wall. I mean, we have to make ourselves uncomfortable. You know, I have plenty of conservative friends who are my friends on Facebook, and everything I post, my Muslim friends see it, my conservative friends see it, my liberal friends see it, and I try to manage that conversation. Even on different, I mean, just last week, you know, I posted something that hinted at kind of where I stand on gun control, and, you know, people on my wall were having this very interesting conversation from all different sides. But I was trying to also elevate it to another place, like where can we find a common ground, right? This is where the beauty of social media comes out, is when you have those diverse conversations. But if you just have an echo chamber, that's when the conspiracy theories happen and really just destabilizing stuff happens.
Thank you. So I studied communications and journalism, and I learned a lot about agenda setting. And it used to be that you would consider that traditional media, legacy media, had the greatest role in agenda setting within society, or it was more the traditional norm. In this day and age, with hashtag campaigns, with social media, how much is that changing who is setting the agenda in terms of what media covers? I mean, I think specifically about the power of hashtag campaigns this year, like the I Stand With Ahmed campaign about the Texas teenage clockmaker. Would that story have been on the national media radar? Would it have launched, you know, it made this kid famous and made the situation infamous had it not been for social media? So to what degree do you each feel in your own spheres that social media is, you know, that there's a trickle up that may be happening from your viewers or your readers?
I mean, I think there's no question that these, I don't know if they're, sometimes they're campaigns, sometimes they're just people reacting to an event, right? I mean, like people who misspelled San Bernardino, for example. Yes. So I think that, to me, it's interesting because, like, I used to try more than I probably do now to read a lot of the ethnic media, like newspapers, watch BET News at night, because it was really like seeing a different America, right? You know, in these sort of segmented communities, what was being covered there was very different on a nightly basis than what you would see on, the national news. And I think, in a way, the value of social media for sort of mainstream journalists is a lot of that kind of conversation, I think, is like bubbling up in a way that, is in front of you if you're following sort of the right people, active people. Twitter is overwhelming. I remember on the morning that the FIFA arrests got made, I had on TweetDeck, I had one channel that was just FIFA, and it was like I was about to have a seizure because, like, the stuff was flipping. It's like the whole world, right? It's like flying by me so fast. But I think that in the sense of exposing more people to different viewpoints, I think it's actually been quite interesting, and certainly has, part of our morning conversation, I run a meeting at 7 a.m. in the morning, and we go through sort of the major news events overnight, our plans for the day, and then at the end, one of the things we always ask is, to our reader engagement, our social media team, is what have we not talked about that you're seeing is in the conversation locally? And there's always something, and it's driven by social media. It's driven by trends in social media, and not every day we cover that, but a lot of the times we do look into it, and we find stories that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. So I think it can be quite influential. But I think it's most influential when it's authentic, yes. Right? So I think when it feels canned or it feels like a campaign. I think with My Muslim ID, it just felt very authentic, right? That people were responding to what was said in a way that felt incredibly real, and I think that then becomes newsworthy.
Yeah, I think in terms of people say they want to launch campaigns, but unless you're like paying for promoted tweets, a campaign's not going to go anywhere unless people organically attach themselves to it. It's meritocratic in that manner. But going back to the original point. I think one of the biggest challenges of our time is trying to figure out how to manage the information overload that we all get. I would love to dive into every single one of these conversations and really just try to get where everyone's coming from, but we're talking thousands, if not millions, of conversations and millions of points of view, and I still don't know how to process that. And I think that's one of the reasons we do retreat into our shell, because it's just overwhelming. And this is why there's a role for professionals to help navigate that, because I think a lot of people out there are struggling with this, in every community. That's why the society is getting so polarized, because I think we just can't take the overload. The overload.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to?
I agree with all that. I want to get to more questions.
Got it. Okay, so we'll move to the next one. There's a question here about what it means to be a reporter now, in the sense that we've seen reporters get suspended or fired for sharing their personal opinions on world events or sharing personal views on hot-button issues. In this day and age, where is that line for reporters? And whether it's specifically at the LA Times or in a broader sphere, and what responsibility, sort of that balance of what responsibility do they have, and also what rights do they have, at the same time?
It's a really fascinating question, because it's something. So in my role, I run the homepage, the website at the LA Times, but I started off as a traditional print reporter. I've covered beats, and I've learned a lot about data reporting, and so I think, like, reporters in general have to be much more sort of jack of all trades than they were ever. I know quite a bit of HTML. All sorts of stuff that, you used to just have to be able to write down on a notepad and transcribe it. So if you're good at writing, bonus. But I have to be incredibly careful about what I say. I don't share generally personal opinions, and I think that it's important not to, because even if I have a personal opinion, a strong one, I feel like I could still go and cover, I covered the presidential campaign in 2000. So this is who I traveled with. I traveled with George Bush, Al Gore. I spent 6 months of my life with Dick Cheney. And I also spent quite a bit of time in a van with Ralph Nader. So, you know, I mean, I covered all of those people, I think, fairly, because whatever my personal feelings are about politics, I think, you know, I could bring an objectivity to it. And I think if I was out there, you know, saying, you know, my personal feelings, then that takes away from my ability to be seen as someone who is fair. And you get called out on it. Like, I joked about something once on Facebook, and like 3 people are like, you know, in your role as an editor at the LA Times, you really shouldn't be saying that. I'm like, I'm sorry, I have to lose my sense of humor now too. But, you know, but I think, but to be fair, like in my moment of my flash of anger, like, really, are you kidding me with this? I thought, you know what, they had a point. You know, they had a point, because everything is public. It's like the idea that there's a private Facebook channel, you know, or, you know, even if you only allowed authorized people to follow your Twitter. I mean, that woman got fired, right, for the jokes about Ebola, or wasn't it Ebola, or
AIDS
HIV?
in Africa.
AIDS in Africa. Okay, so, but you know, it's like, she was an idiot. I mean, you know, I mean, really, like, I would say nothing on social media with the expectation that it wouldn't eventually get out. And I hope the Sony hack has taught a lot of us that, and God help me if that happened, that, you know, even what you say in your email is potentially public. So I think it's challenging. You know, you used to just have conversations, and, you know, people have to recount what they said. You do have to be a lot more careful. And I think but I think you should be, and I think you should be more thoughtful about how you process your personal feelings and how you portray what's happening in reality.
Thank you.
One of the things with that, I was just going to say that we're in such an oversharing population, in the sense of that I'm going to share that I love this water, and here's a picture of what I ate, and then the shoes that I just bought at the mall are fabulous, and I'm going to do this. And I always say, gosh, when we're always saying where we are, someone could go rob your house. Like, you're always, you know, you're telling every step of your life. Stop it. The oversharing is unbelievable in that sense. So I think that a lot of times, and I always will tell, you know, when we always hear someone get up and they'll say that they're sorry for what they said. No, you weren't. You're sorry you got caught. That's what it really is. So if you're in doubt, if you think you should tweet it, write it, Facebook it, tell a friend. Physically, not with the microphone.
Exactly. There you go.
Right?
All right, Shahed, last question for you. Considering you're the founder of Affinis Labs, I want you to tell us a little bit about what Affinis Labs is all about and what you hope to do with it. And this audience question is a good dovetail for that, which is, what types of Muslim-focused startups do you feel the market is ready for?
So the whole idea of Affinis Labs came about because I had spent, you know, 10, 15 years in what is called the digital Islamic economy, and seeing vast markets, global markets, 500 million Muslims between the ages of 18 and 25 that are upwardly mobile. They're culturally more alike each other than like their parents' generation. They care about their identity. They want to spend on it, but very few people actually catering to that market. And what I did with Affinis Labs is try to bring in promising startups that I thought could fit a couple of models. One is by Muslims for everybody, meaning you're creating, you're tapping into Islamic heritage and values and creating products that have universal appeal, that can kind of transmit that to the masses. This is Mitchell. I'm a founding board member of Saffron Road. If anyone's heard of Saffron Road frozen entrees, like, you know, 2% of their market is Muslims. The vast majority is everyone else, and it's part of that is how do you define halal in a way that is universally acceptable, universally kind of appreciated, right? So we're trying to bring in companies that do that. But the other thing that we're trying to do, try to seed this innovation in Muslim communities, is to do hackathons. Hackathons are bringing people together for a couple of days with various different backgrounds and trying to solve a specific social or business challenge, and doing this in Muslim communities with specific challenges that have to do with Muslim identity and life. And we've been doing these around the world. We're going to be starting to do them in America. We did one in Abu Dhabi. We did one in Sydney on anti-Muslim sentiment. We're doing one in Silicon Valley with Google and Facebook on combating online hate. We're going to be doing future ones on cultivating Muslim storytellers. But we just want to try to seed the environment. And the number one thing that we found is it's not about skill or talent. It's about confidence. It's about feeling that you can do it. That's the number one barrier for most people. And we realize that once we get people into this situation and we live stream their results and we fund the winners so they can get developed, that they can do amazing things. And so we're hoping in the next couple of years to start spinning out companies and ideas and initiatives. First couple apps are going to start coming out early next year that show that there's a lot of talent in this group of people and they have a lot to give the world. And so, you know, I want to show that Muslims are not just a source of problems, they're a source of solutions.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So, I want to ask now a closing question for everyone. That has two prongs. The first is considering new media now, right? What do each of you think that we have to look forward to a few years from now? What's your prediction of what will continue to impact your industry or your arena in the years to come that people should keep an eye out for? And secondly, we spend a lot of time talking about the points of darkness, and I hope that we can end with the points of light. What is one point of light that you see that that gives you hope for how this transition from legacy media to new media can be a force for good? So what's your prediction for the future, and what's a bright spot that you want to give a little attention to?
Prediction for the future, I think that there are so many innovative idea thinkers out there that we haven't even scratched the surface of what we are going to see socially. There's so many people that are now in institutions where coding is becoming available. So I think that we're going to see the next Snapchat, the next Twitter, the next Facebook. There's going to be multiple, I think, generations of that. So I think that it will only enhance television viewing for us, because television isn't going anywhere. As much as people keep saying TV's dead, they're watching, people are watching still. So I think that is definitely going to expand it. And I think for the light, because I work in an industry where that's all I see is light and opportunity. I think that one of the things that I say tremendously is that I want to continue to provide the access, because before anyone can ever do anything, you need that access, then the exposure, and then give someone an opportunity. Say yes to someone. And when someone says yes to you, say yes to someone else. And I think that will really be able to, I always love to say, each one teach one. Let's all teach other, get to know each other more. And I think that will be my light, because I know that our communities are resilient.
I think you're going to see, and you already are rapidly, these long time, whether it's the LA Times, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the big names in American journalism make a much more substantial pivot to digital news in a way that is sustainable, right? So a lot of us are now grappling with almost like these dual operations. You have what's in real time or what's online, which I think for a long time was seen as lesser, even though I think it's informing more people than really what lands in your driveway in the morning still. And I think that we saw this last week with San Bernardino, the quality of what we were producing, in close to real time was equal or better than what we were able to publish in sort of this, limited number of, pages. And I think that that's significant for American journalism, because I think that professional journalism does matter, is very important. And I think having these organizations make that change in a way that is sustainable is crucial, really, to continuing forward. And I would just say that I think new media is so exciting. I mean, I feel like, you used to be able to just put something on a piece of paper and print, a photograph or a flat graphic, and that was all you could do. And the reason why I moved into digital is because it was so exciting. We could create these databases that lived on, that you could explore things on your own and really understand subject matter. And I think different people learn differently. So video is incredibly interesting, and certainly has existed for a long time outside of print newspapers. We were just talking about, we did a video on what Allah Akbar means, where we went out and talked to people in the Muslim community, and ironically, or I don't know if it's ironic, but interestingly, we published it a few minutes before everything started happening in San Bernardino. But I think, to explain to people that this is not scary, what this means, how people interpret it, in a way that I think it's got something like 3 million views on Facebook now off of our Facebook page. So that's like reaching an audience that in the printed LA Times you never could have, you know, or even, you know, our coverage of the Syrian refugee crisis, which goes beyond just, you know, the moment it would have appeared on the front page of the paper and is still accessible to anyone looking for it. So I see a lot of excitement and a lot of opportunity to really reach more communities and tell stories in ways that are so much more, and I love writing and I love to write, but that, you know, are more nuanced and go beyond just that medium.
I know this will be hard for a lot of people to believe. Probably a lot of people in this room will not believe this, given the events of this week. But given the success that we've had since 9/11, given the immense amount of talent, Muslim talent in the pipeline in every possible field, but most importantly the creative fields, and given the resilience that America has shown in the face of what's happening, if you kind of ignore the online hype, if you look at the real world, I'd like to think that we're at that kind of the worst of it, and that 5 years from now we will actually be much more integrated, much more accepted, much more felt like neighbors than we are today. I truly believe that. I mean, it's because the amount of impact on the social sphere, on lots of different spheres, by talented Muslims expressing themselves is, we've not even scratched the surface of what we're going to see in 5 or 10 years.
Thank you all. Please give our panelists a round of applause.